They're not distinguished. And a little bit later on in our study here of the laws, we will make it very clear then how we as Christians today are to respond to the clear teaching of the laws in the Old Testament. I'd like you to turn your Bibles to the book of Leviticus, chapter 1. If you have an electronic Bible you'd like to, and you need to log on, we do have a wireless here, wireless system. It's Grace Church-P. And if you were, there it is. There's our password. You can log on to your electronic Bible there. Leviticus chapter 1. We have the scriptures that we can read along, and I'll just read then from the book of Leviticus, and I'll read as the screen reads so that we can be on the same page here, I think. Okay, so this is the ESV. Good, all right. So the Lord called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when any of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of livestock from the herd or from the flock." Now he begins to this legislative laws describing the burnt offering. "If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall offer a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. He shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him. Then he shall kill the bull before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall bring the blood and throw the blood against the sides of the altar that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then he shall flay the burnt offering, cut it into pieces, and the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall arrange the pieces, the head and the fat and the wood that is on the fire on the altar. But its entrails and its legs he, that is the worshiper, shall wash with water, and the priest then shall burn all of it on the altar as a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If his gift for a burnt offering is from the flock, from the sheep or goats, he shall bring a male without blemish, and he shall kill it on the north side of the altar before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall throw its blood against the sides of the altar. And he shall cut it into pieces with its head and its fat, and the priest shall arrange them on the wood that is on the fire on the altar. But the entrails and the legs he shall wash with water, and the priest shall offer all of it and burn it on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If his offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or pigeons. And the priest shall bring it to the altar and wring off its head and burn it on the altar. Its blood shall be drained out on the side of the altar. He shall remove its crop with its contents and cast it beside the altar on the east side in the place for ashes. He shall tear it open by its wings, but shall not sever it completely. And the priest shall burn it on the altar, on the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, a food offering, with a pleasing aroma to the Lord." Are there any representatives from PETA here today? I apologize. I didn't write the book. These are God's animals. God created them. God brought them. And God is also now telling us how these animals are then to be prepared for sacrifice. It's a bloody mess, folks. It really is. It's not very tidy. It's not very nice. It is, frankly, disgusting. I mean, think about it. If you were a poor person, you would bring your little bird up here, and I would take it and rip off its head and tear it, and it's not nice. So we might ask the question, what's the big deal here? Good question. We'll get to it. I'd like us to just consider, first of all, these first couple of verses. First one, in verse 1, it says, God called Moses. The Lord called Moses. Now, it's interesting because that word called is not used with reference to when God meets with Moses. It'll say God meets with Moses, God speaks with Moses, but this is the only time where it says God called Moses. That word called is important because it has the meaning to speak in a loud, clear voice. It has the impression of making an announcement. So he's calling to Moses that he's going to make an announcement. It would be similar to the president of a nation or a country saying, I'm going to hold a special press conference from the office of the president. If you're an American, it would be from the Oval Office. Whenever the president speaks from the Oval Office, generally we want to pay attention to what he has to say. God is saying to Moses, we're meeting in the entrance of in the tent of meeting. I'm calling you because you need to take note of what is about to follow. And that is simply this. Sacrifice is at the heart of Israel's worship. Therefore, the regulations on sacrifice, which are about to be announced, which are about to be given to you, they are very important. Don't miss it. As they meet here in the tent of meeting, the thing that we need to understand is God is speaking to Moses. It's a narrative that's taking place. We begin in Genesis, and I was telling you briefly the story that's brought us down to this point. We need to understand that the story continues on down through history. It's giving us a history of people. You see, these laws that are given is the context of their whole livelihood. And why is that important? It's important for this reason. When we read the book of Proverbs, the Proverbs has timeless principles and teachings that at all times and all places, those teachings can be made applicable to us today. But the laws that are being given to these people today regarding the sacrifice, these laws are for those people at that time. Because we look down through history and we see that there were some changes in how they went about doing this. And so the context of these laws of sacrifice are that we're not talking about universal principles as to exactly how it's done, but there are some principles that we gather from this that are very applicable to us today. These are teaching God's holiness in the context of Israel's deliverance from Egypt. So, as we go through this, remember this, folks. This is happening approximately 1 year, within 1 year, after the people of Israel have been miraculously delivered from Egypt. And that was huge. I mean, think about walking through this water of water, the Red Sea. And think about walking through on dry land there. All the people get across. You turn around to see the enemy coming after you, the fiercest army in the world at the time, and then God gives the signal, whatever it was, and the waters go back, and the Egyptian army is wiped out. You see that. Man, you realize you have been amazingly and divinely delivered from enslavement. There was no hope on your own other than the fact that God stepped in and He delivered you. And from there they went to Sinai and they met with God and they were just incredibly impressed with the power and might of God. I say that to say this, folks, because in just a moment we're going to celebrate also a sacrifice of Jesus Christ. I think sometimes we lose the wonder of what happened in our being delivered from a life of sin. I think that as we get a little bit further into this book, you'll understand a little bit more about how important the sacrifice of Jesus is over and above these sacrifices that we read about today. This people are overcome with this salvation, and now God is speaking to them, and God's holiness is being impressed upon them. God's holiness is unchanging, but its expression, the expression of His holiness, may change from age to age as to how it's going to be revealed. And then he says in this passage, the Lord called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Says, speak to the people of Israel. And again, there's that narrative that takes place. And then notice, when any of you brings an offering to the Lord, when any of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of livestock, the herd, or from the flock. Notice the options you have available there. Did you get the options? No? Well, what happened, folks? Because we certainly have this attitude today that we have the option, that we can worship God without an offering. Notice what he says here. When any of you bring an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of livestock from the herd or from the flock. And then he goes on to describe it. It's not an option. This whole idea of worshiping God is something that is absolutely imperative. The sacrifice is imperative to worship. No sacrifice, no worship, no coming into God's presence. It's a far cry from the way we could see worship today. So let's look at this burnt offering, shall we? Let's just go through some of the very gruesome details to help us get an understanding that our concept today is very clean, very tidy, and also non-participatory. We do not participate very much. You'll notice today, when you came here, you basically made your way into this room and found yourself a seat. And your activity in the worship today has been pretty much stand up, sing, sit down, and listen. Close? Really participating. Now, it'll be a little bit different today because you actually get to take a cup and a piece of broken bread and participate in a ritual that we call the communion. But on a regular, normal basis, it's basically come, find your seat, stand up, sing, sit down, listen, go home. That's our worship. That's what we call it. Far cry from what we're going to see here. The thing that, in fact, is, let me just kind of go through this scenario as we continue on in the introduction here. We have this worshiper who, in the vast of the numbers of the tribes of Israel, he decides that he needs to go and he needs to offer a burnt offering. And so he has an animal that he has been saving just for this occasion. He doesn't just decide one day, I'm going to go out there and see if I have something. He has to have been planning for this because, again, I need to reiterate the fact that these are people who just came out of Egypt. They've been out of Egypt for less than a year. They haven't had a chance to actually collect or to grow their herd or their flocks. They have some that they've brought with them. In this time, they've had to prepare, and Jesus, or God, is saying to them, when you come to worship, here's what you're going to have to do. You have to bring an animal that meets certain requirements. It must be a domesticated animal. Notice he says from the herd or from the flock. No wild game, wild animals. Why? Because it doesn't cost anything. There's no expense to it. Go out and shoot a lamb and give it to God. It has to be something that you put effort into. You raised it, you fed it, you cared for it, you nurtured it, you made sure it was unblemished, perfect, and that lamb was set aside then for you to bring before the altar. And so as you bring this male in the first year, in fact, as we read about 3 choices here, you could bring a bullock, a goat or a lamb, or a bird. Here's another thing to remember. The value of the animal has nothing at all to do with the immensity of the sin that you're asking forgiveness for. It has only to do with economics. If you're wealthy enough to have cattle, then you bring a bull. If you're not, but you have sheep, then you bring sheep. If you're dirt poor, you bring a pigeon. but a pigeon that you've kept aside for this purpose. Everybody brings something according to their economic standing. Again, in the Middle Eastern times,